we're going to cover tackling the core questions of your YC application. As Mo mentioned, my name is Doug. I'm excited we have a smaller group here. So what I'll try to do is get a little bit of engagement. We like to think of these as more workshops. So happy to share and listen in on what you all are building and help you figure out how to put together and apply for YC in the most compelling way. So let me switch here. So my name is Doug. I am on our startup business development team here at AWS. I've been here for a little over a year and a half. Prior to that, I was an early employee at a company that went through a program called Techstars, as well as an early employee at another startup called Xamarin. Both of those companies went on to be acquired and went through acquisitions. And then I was in a venture capital role at a firm called Kairos. It's based out of New York City. And in between, I mentor and advise a lot of different startups. But what's unique about our startup business development team here at AWS is that we're formed out of a lot of folks with similar type of professional backgrounds as myself. So a lot of ex-founders, ex-VCs, ex-operators. And we spend a lot of time working with startups to really help them build up their business. So we work with partners, in this case, the Venture Café. We also work with partners like Y Combinator in helping them get really good companies into their program, as well as helping them take their companies to the next level. So our team, we've worked with Y Combinator for about a decade. We have really notable YC companies that are big customers of ours, like Airbnb and Dropbox and Stripe. And I think the list kind of goes on. But we've learned a lot about their process, and we've worked really closely with them to be able to democratize a lot of the things, demystify their application, and help make sure that you all are able to put together as compelling a case for why you should be involved in their program. So there we go. Goals of this workshop, I would hope for you all to walk away with an understanding of what YC is specifically looking for in a startup, learn some of the best practices in preparing for your application, and then specifically focusing on what our team has drawn out to be these 4 core questions. So the YC application process, when you go online to apply, we've identified that these are the 4 key questions that you really need to nail in order to get the attention of the YC team. So we'll dive into that here. First, getting into what does YC look for in a startup? So they have worked with all sorts of different types of companies, but there are some common themes in what they're looking for. So first, they're looking for if a team has the necessary skills to actually build a product. We've seen a lot of folks will be applying and they'll be mentioning that they'll be outsourcing some development if they're building a software company to a third party, or they might have a consultant or a contractor who's actually doing some pretty core pieces of developing that product. And generally the YC team steers away from those. They look for people who have the skills to actually build whatever it is that you're trying to put out into the world. So if you're, for example, building a hardware company, you're trying to put together some new consumer product, they'd want to be able to understand that within either your skill set or someone else on your teams, that you have the ability to put that product into market, and that you're not relying on, for example, a future hire or some sort of outside consultant in order to develop the product itself. The second piece, they're looking for unique insights into the market. And what this could be is that you have maybe an obsession with a certain industry or vertical. Say that you're maybe not necessarily trained in the medical field, but you've become really obsessed in how people are trying to go through therapies for cancer, and you've been just studying it and doing a lot of independent research for 5 or 7 years. And that's really given you an idea about things that are happening in the market that maybe somebody with no context wouldn't understand from the onset. There's also obviously things like if you've been working in an industry for 5, 10, 15 years and understand that industry really deeply, that was another thing that's really worth highlighting, is they look for that on the founding team. So they really want to find people who have a little bit of that alpha as it relates to a problem, and having a unique insight on what some of the solutions might be. The next one is they look for people who are really willing to push through the wall and build the company regardless of if you get into YC or not. So they really look for the grit and people who are able to say, if we're able to get into this and we're able to raise money from YC, great. If we're not, we're still going to go ahead and continue to try to do this. So they're looking for a motivation outside of just getting into Y Combinator from these startup founders. Next one is kind of an interesting insight, is that they have seen teams that don't have a equal split amongst co-founders generally end up having issues when it comes to ownership further down the line. So if you're working on a startup and you've got another 2 or 3 people that are co-founders, they're looking for as equal of an equity split as possible, because a lot of the times there might end up becoming disputes. And when the equity is weighted very differently in favor of certain people, that those disputes can become a little bit uglier. So they're really trying to find equal ownership amongst the folks who are taking that product or taking that startup to market. And then the last piece is familiarity with their co-founders. They're looking for people who maybe didn't meet their co-founder yesterday, but people who might have worked together before in another role, people who maybe went to school together, people who have at least a little bit of a history in working with one another. And then they're able to at least understand that should any issues arise within the team, that those are people who are comfortable with working things out with each other, people who aren't just complete strangers. So the founding team, they spend a lot of time really looking at and thinking through, because it's an incredibly important piece. And especially if you consider the fact that they're an incubator and making investments into companies that are very early stage, the team is really one of the most crucial pieces of that. So the next piece is on the market. So they really look at, are you building a product for a $1 billion market? Is this something that is really scalable to the point where you can sustain making a really large business? And if it's not a $1 billion business today or $1 billion market, can it become one further down the road? So if you're building something that maybe only hundreds of people in the United States might use, or maybe 100 people, 200 people within Philadelphia might use, it's really hard for the YC team to really extrapolate out what that huge opportunity might be. But if you're building something that hundreds of people in every single city around the country might want to be getting in and purchasing or using, then that shows that that's a pretty large market opportunity. The last piece is a significant problem and solution. So they're not necessarily looking for something that might kind of add to the status quo and is just a slight improvement over the way that people are doing things today. They're looking for a really significant pain point. So for example, if you find that doctors aren't able to fully communicate with their patients because of certain issues that they have around the technology that's at their disposal, that's something that could be a really significant problem when you look at what the total addressable market is. And that would mean that the solution would be fairly significant as well. Also on the technology side, is this something that only a handful of small businesses might need, or something that businesses from a small, medium business all the way to a large enterprise, a global organization might want to purchase and use? So again, thinking about what's the significance of the problem that you're building. Is it something that isn't just people saying, oh, wow, that's a big pain for me, but something that you think you could go not just nationally, but even potentially globally and get that same reaction from people. So really emphasis on that significance piece. And then the last one is traction. And I think that they're fairly comfortable knowing that companies are going to be really early when they're applying to Y Combinator, but they're really looking at what progress have you made? Progress could mean a lot of different things at the early stage, but just showing that there's a sustained effort in trying to take this company to market is something that YC really focuses in on. We're also looking at, if you have potential competitors in the market, how quickly are you adapting, and are you iterating much more faster than maybe a legacy competitor, a company who's old and maybe not moving as fast in the space? Are you at the stage of venture able to say, we've been able to get some new users onboarded really quickly, we've pushed out new features, we've integrated different things into our product at a much faster rate than maybe the competitors are in the space? And then if you haven't really had as much of that progress versus your competitors, maybe just demonstrating what the amount of time will be until you're able to push out a minimum viable product. So they're looking at, if you don't have a minimum viable product that's in market at that moment, how quickly are you able to get one out? Are you able to get one out before you actually enter Y Combinator? And then they're able to actually determine whether or not the programming is appropriate. Most of the YC programming is about doing customer development, getting feedback, trying to scale different sales processes. And so it's really difficult for the team to be able to help companies that might not necessarily be at a stage where they have something that users or customers are going to be able to take advantage of. And then the last one is, if people have applied for Y Combinator multiple times, what has the progress been between YC applications? So there's a lot of different stories of people who have applied for Y Combinator multiple times. I have one particular friend who applied 6 times. And so when people are really trying to get in, they understand that if you don't get in on the first try, but if you go back and you effectively have the same application, the same process, you haven't really moved the needle very much, that's less interesting for them than if it's somebody who's applied and they've been able to gain a lot of new insights and bring a lot more to the table as it relates to what they're trying to build. So those are the three main things, really. Again, founding team, market, and traction primarily are the areas that they're looking at when they're sitting back and looking at the total pieces of the application. Now, a little bit more tactically, how do you actually fill out the application? So first, important to note that the deadline coming up for their summer class is March 19th. We encourage people to submit as early as you can, as early as you feel prepared to do. It's better than when you get your application in towards the end, when they're getting a huge influx of applications. You're probably going to be able to get a little bit more time and attention on your application than when they're sifting through literally thousands. What we recommend doing is creating a shared document and getting on the same page with the application with any of your co-founders. So making sure everyone is on the same page when you're actually submitting and people have input, not just typically, a CEO who goes off into a corner and does it themselves, but really integrating the rest of the team into the application. And then another thing we recommend doing is copying and pasting those questions into the shared doc and really reviewing these questions before you apply. Now, remember, it's good to get the application in early, but you want to make sure that you've at least edited and put some thought into it instead of just rushing to get the application out. So it's worth taking that application into a document, putting thought into it, doing different versioning and revisions. And then once you're ready to submit confidently, copying and pasting that back into the application portal and dropping your application in there. So the way that we really recommend is, again, plan ahead. With March 19th being the deadline, there's not a whole lot of time that you have until you're going to have to submit that application. So really think about, if you want to submit for this summer or you're really serious, working backwards and how much time you're going to need to put in an application that you feel good about. The next one is identifying your strengths and your risks before you start to write. We'll get into that here in a second, but really important to really think about what your narrative looks like, what the story is as it relates to your YC application. And then the last one is being open to revisions and remembering that because you're not fully submitting the application, giving yourself time to give a couple of different versions of what your application might look like, so that when you're shipping it, it truly is the best version of what you've been able to put together. So diving into the strengths and the risks. So first, we talked a little bit about how important it is to focus on the team, but it's, I think, a really valuable exercise to look at, how is your team uniquely qualified to do this? Again, is it because you studied this in school, you worked on it in a job? Thinking at a high level of that strength and then weaving that into various parts of your application so that they truly feel like you're a unique person that can bring this company to market. The second one is to really think about, what is that secret sauce? So is your data strong? Is it compelling? Are you able to tell a really good story? Have you talked to 500 customers or potential customers and they've given you really strong response? In addition to that, do you have intellectual property? Do you have anything trademarked or registered? Do you have anything that you've developed that is really truly unique? And then how do you weave that into the rest of the application? And the last one, and then this is a not intellectual property per se, but are you a first mover? Is this something that you've identified that nobody else in the market is doing, and why? And I think that if you can tell a really strong, compelling story around that, it really makes you stand out to say that the market is doing X. We think that in the future, people will want to do Y. And we think that's a really big market opportunity. It really shows that you're thinking ahead, that you're looking and building towards the future. And that gives you a leg up on a lot of other applications out there. Now, on the flip side of that, it's about looking at the risks. So is this a saturated market? Are you building something that, for example, is a tool that allows for being able to share photos online? That's something that a lot of people have done with Flickr and all sorts of different types of tools. So if that is what you're going into, how is it that you can speak to that? What are the strengths that you have that can differentiate you from maybe some of these other competitors in this market, or many other competitors in a fairly saturated market? Another piece is there data to prove your hypothesis? So if you are speculating on where you think that the market will be going, if you are, for example, a first mover, how can that really be debunked? How can somebody look at it and say, well, you're saying that you think the market's going to go that way, but I don't believe you? Do you have any data that you can bring to the table so you can say, well, actually, this is what we're looking at, and this is what makes us think that we're the first mover in something that's going to end up being pretty compelling further down the road? And then the last piece is, when you tell this to your spouse, your friends, your maybe investors, colleagues, what are they challenging you on? Are there things that people will say, oh, it's a pretty good idea, but I just don't know if people would actually download that app, or I don't know how many times people might use that, or, well, I don't really know if I would pay for that. When you start to collect some of that feedback, just understand that it's most likely that the YC team will probably have the same opinion when they're going through your application. So getting ahead of those questions is really valuable as you start to weave together your application narrative. Now, I mentioned we've identified these 4 core questions that are central to a strong application. So what we'll do is we'll dive into each question. We'll also be able to show some examples of how to answer them strongly for yourself. Or excuse me, show some examples of YC companies that answer them really strongly, and then go through some exercises to help you be able to answer these 4 questions strongly for yourself. So we'll take a quick look here. And the first question is, describe your company, what your company does in 50 characters or less. Now, we always say there's a character limit here for a reason, and that's to force you to be concise. It's very easy to go on a long narrative about what it is that you're building, especially if you're incredibly passionate about it. But the challenge is being able to really be concise and simple with your language in order to get it, so that you can immediately connect with the person that's reading your application and get them to understand truly what it is that you're building and why it's valuable. We think that that doesn't start with telling people what the problem is. It usually is just a very strong, short, emphatic statement about what the solution is. We mentioned that it's okay to use popular market substitutes. So for example, we're building the Netflix for blank. We're building the Airbnb for Y. We're building the Nike for blank. It's helpful in getting to shorten that, and it just shows that you fully understand some of the market dynamics and that you're leveraging business models maybe in another way that hasn't been applied before. We also recommend not using industry jargon. So if you are a really deep expert in a specific industry, it's important to not use these phrases or words that are really confusing or might not have a lot of context, because you can imagine the YC team might not necessarily have a lot of that context as well, and it won't land as strongly. So we took this as an example with Airbnb, and this is a hypothetical. So if somebody asked back in 2009, when Airbnb was applying for Y Combinator, what was it that they did? They say connecting people with alternative vacancies and can rent out strangers' apartments. Now, that doesn't sound like $1 billion opportunity. It doesn't sound like something that anyone would want to maybe use. So you really kind of have to sit back and say, okay, well, it's concise, yes. It doesn't really necessarily speak to a solution, and it doesn't make me walk away thinking that this is a strong market opportunity. Now, if you look at what Airbnb actually submitted, so Airbnb is the first online marketplace that lets travelers book rooms with locals instead of hotels. So there's a lot of elegance in the simplicity of this. So one, they say that they're the first. So they talk about how they're a first mover and that nobody has done this before. The second one is they say they're a marketplace. So they allude to what their business model is. And that makes it really clear, not just how they're going to make money, but some of the dynamics that are at play. You've got that lets travelers, so very clear in who the audience is, book rooms with locals. So they're a marketplace. You've got travelers and locals on both sides. And then the instead of hotels is really interesting because that shows you what the total market opportunity is. So when you're reading this, and maybe you're not as familiar with short-term rentals, or and Airbnb did this, short-term rentals didn't even exist, you think, oh, okay, so they're actually going after anybody who might book a hotel. And so that market opportunity is really big. So this is a really good example of ways to really focus in on that 50 character limit and being really concise with your language in order to show people what it is that you're building. So really powerful. Now, I unfortunately don't have the chat up because I have the video on here, but maybe it'd be worth, just as an exercise, if anyone can describe your company in 50 characters or less, maybe drop it into the chat, take note, and remember, use that character limit. The 50 characters is really important, as well as some of these other topics here. And let me do this. I will stop sharing. Is anybody bold enough to drop their 50 character limit company description into the chat? No judgment. Maybe we'll give people one more. Oh, there we go. Okay. Helping the middle class invest in fine art by utilizing AI. I like that. I think it's really good. I think that years with the utilizing AI, it leaves me wanting a little bit, where I think, okay, is there a business model that is driven by the AI? But overall, I think that's really compelling and definitely starting down the right path. All-in-one marketing platform for small businesses. Boom. Pretty simple. Super compelling. I think for the all-in-one marketing platform, I do wonder that I've maybe heard or seen about things that might be similar. So it might be worth teasing out if you're the first to do something in particular, highlighting that. You know, are you the first AI-driven all-in-one marketing platform, or the first affordable all-in-one marketing platform for small businesses, or first flexible all-in-one marketing platform for small businesses? Something along those lines might be really neat in drawing people out and getting people to see the opportunity. Empoder, Renaissance Technology Partners for the new and small stock investor. Cool, interesting. I think I'm reading that as kind of like maybe a Robinhood type platform. So I'd be curious if there is something that you're doing that is unique, what it might be. Bringing new small stock investors in? Are you focused on certain parts of the population that are underserved by financial tools? That might be a thing that you could tease out there. We've got from Mark, marketplace for startups to pick ecosystems to move to. That's very interesting. Yeah, I think that it speaks really clearly to what the value proposition is, speaks to the customer, talks a little bit about the solution. So yeah, very, very compelling there too. Well, I appreciate the four of you all who shared here. I'll jump back into this presentation. And I'm back. Screen's good? Perfect, I got some nods, great. So we went over that first question. Now we'll dive into the second question. And this is, what is your company going to make? Please describe your product and what it does or will do. So we look at this and breaking the question down in a couple of different ways. And there's no character limit here, which I think is really good because it gives you the ability to be a little bit more flexible with how you're presenting what you're doing. So we start with one, the what. So we are making X for Y to do Z. We think that's a really good way to structure the initial response to this, where you're not just saying we are making X for Y, but you're alluding to what the solution is when you're speaking to what it does or will do. So you're tying this all back where it's not just you pushing this thing out into the world, but it's going to be doing something that's going to have some sort of inherent value for whoever that customer or end user is. Now, the next question or next part of the answer to this is the why. So why should this product exist? It's good to really go into some of the history here. And I think especially if you're going into a saturated market that might have a lot of players, you can speak to historically, traditionally, currently, people needed to do this. So you can really paint a picture that the market isn't really being served that well by the existing products or existing services, and talk to the why it is that you feel like the market can support what it is that you're building. And the last one is the value. So this is the magic, right? So imagining a world where you build this product and you're getting it into the user or customer's hands. Now they're able to do something, right? They're able to go and achieve something. And you mentioned, I really like the middle class being able to invest in art. I think that's a really compelling thing to speak to, because you can say, you know, now these users, they're able to put some of their savings into the return of fine art. And that it just shows that there's a value that's unlocked there that is kind of hidden behind a traditional system or traditional mechanisms that haven't let those people participate in the fine art industry to date. So this is a really important question because I think it can really help you stand out. It's an opportunity for you to really be flexible and talk about what that all up opportunity looks like. But we recommend using the structure of the what, the why, and the value when speaking to this. And it's a really good way to talk about some of the mechanisms that have been in place in the market that you're going after and how you're specifically doing things a little bit differently. Now, getting into this, so we pulled a couple of YC applications just to demonstrate some examples of what people did that ultimately got them into the program. So this is a company called Zendit. It's a financial services or fintech platform. You can see here the what. So they move cash remittances across the world from your pocket. You can see they go into a little bit more about what it is that they've actually built. They talk about their focus on the market, and then they leverage a certain technology. In this case, it's decentralized ledgers, in order to do something fairly differentiated. So I'll take just a second here, and if you just scroll through the what, give it a quick read. So again, even if you don't have a lot of information, and there is some industry jargon here, you get a fairly good idea of what they're going after and what the market opportunity is. So take another look here at the why. So you see here the focus when it starts with currently. I'll have you read it maybe for a couple sentences here. One thing that I really like about the why is it goes back to the point I was making on the previous slide of how people have been previously underserved. So they don't just mention that it's better than, for example, a competitor like Western Union, but they go deeper into explaining that it's cheaper, it has fewer errors, and it lets you store and send money anytime. So I think a lot of people will say, well, we're better than the competitors. Here, they really give you an idea of why those competitors aren't serving the market. And even for someone like me, I don't know Western Union that well or what their experience is like. I walk away reading this paragraph and thinking, oh, there's a big opportunity for somebody to go and compete with them. Now, I'll have you read the last piece here, which is the value. So again, this I think is a really great way. They show that when they say the difference between sleeping with cash under their pillow and having a secure digital wallet, shows that they really know their users and that they've really done the work to understand what that use case looks like. I think that they've really tied the story well here when they add that value piece, because it shows that they have a really deep understanding of the actual mechanisms and what the users are doing. And it's something that can overall end up really building towards the credibility that they have when it comes to the idea, the concept, as well as the team. So we'll take another look at this one here. This is a company called Optimize from summer of 2013 from Y Combinator. So start with the what. Real quick, there's a lot of industry jargon here. I think that there's definitely, I mean, with WYSIWYG, I've worked in software for a long time, so I'm familiar with that. But to the regular person, probably a acronym that doesn't make a lot of sense and is kind of strange when you first see it. So I think there's a little bit of jargon in this, but overall, I think they do a good job of talking about what the value is, what people get access to by using this product, and the ways that ultimately developers are able to do a better job, or excuse me, non-developers, people who are not a software engineer or programmer, are able to build a mobile application or build A/B testing. Now, the next piece here is on the why. I'll give you a second to read through that piece. So this really touches on that historic piece as well. It says in the current market, you have to be fairly technical in order to do this type of A/B testing. But they make it so that if you're not technical, you can do this type of testing too. So I think they do a really good job of outlining that historic piece. Now, they don't necessarily get to the what does that mean overall. So they don't speak to, I think, the why a non-programmer might want to do that and what the overall value or maybe missed opportunity might be. Now, we'll get to this last piece here, which I think they touch on that just a little bit. So here they talk about, I think, what that total opportunity size looks like, the significance of the problem. They say it could be integrated into 100% of the apps. They say that it's going to make it really easy. But I think there's still opportunity here to get back to the point I was making on the why of why is it that a non-programmer would really want to do this. And I think they talk about how they're underserved, but a good opportunity to maybe flex a little bit more on what exactly that non-developer or non-programmer might do. But again, overall, other than maybe the industry jargon tying together a little bit more about the value, this was a strong, compelling application when it comes to just understanding what that total product looks like. So good examples here. Now we've gone through these. We'll take a second, and again, I can jump off screen here if folks want to add it to the chat. Understand if you don't, but maybe if you have a piece of paper, you've got your notes up on your computer, take a minute or two to really answer this question of what is your company going to make? Please describe your product and what it does or will do. So I'll leave this here up on the screen. We'll give you all maybe call it 30 seconds to a minute just to throw some ideas together. Oh, I was trying to minimize. Let's see. We'll just stop this. Let's see if we can get. Nobody shared yet. All right. Oh, we got one. Great, David. I will do you a favor and I will get these slides back up so you can finish. Let's do this. Oh, all right. I've got the chat up. Now I'm good. All right, Ellen, you've got DIY platform that helps small businesses through the SEO process and helps them generate more web traffic. I really like that. Very clean, concise. We'll move on here in a second. If anyone wants to drop any last ones in here. All right, so we'll get to one of our next core questions here. Why did you pick this idea to work on? Do you have domain expertise in this area? How do you know people need what you're making? So again, this core question is actually maybe a, a three-parter, but we look at breaking this up and answering it in three main ways. So first one is your personal experience. So again, we all have our own lived experience. We have things that we've gone through, which can lead to us being really passionate about building something. In this example, we have as college students, we each have experienced or personally experienced the pain of having to leave our room and walk to the store to pick something up. So you can imagine this is something that says, okay, you're living that experience. It's a day-to-day thing and something that you've really thought about deeply because you had to experience it, whether it's walking down the street to pick up something in the store, going and taking care of your family, taking care of your kids, taking care of a loved one. So those deep personal experiences definitely highlight some of the passion and the reason why we would go about building something, and a good reason why a lot of people end up building something. The next one is on that professional experience. So some people will say in this example, when I founded my first company, I was trying to build something and I kept running into this particular problem. Or when I was working in this area of finance, I ended up realizing that people aren't really doing the work to get this type of problem solved. So your professional experience, regardless of how long you've been in the job market, shows that you're spending time working on something and that it gives you an opportunity to really flex and show that you're the right person to bring this product to market. And the last piece is domain expertise. And again, I mentioned this can be something that is a personal area of interest or hobby, regardless of what your career or job is in. If you're building a company in something and you can say, I've been researching this area for 7 years, I've been reading a ton of books about it, and I've been talking to people about it and going to meetups and just being a big participant in the community, it shows that you have that domain expertise, that you've been able to go out and become a part of that conversation, and that conversation has ultimately informed the company that you're trying to build. So really important to think about the ways that, this is a fairly personal question, and just telling a little bit more of the story of you and why you're going out and trying to build this company. So now we've got a little bit of an exercise here. So focusing on one or two themes. So we mentioned the personal, professional, or domain experience or expertise, using some of the team strengths that you might have, and then any data or anecdotes that you can really bring to bear. So thinking about, and we'll take a second here for you to maybe jot down some notes. I won't make you all share in the chat if it's something that is fairly personal, but just thinking a little bit more about, again, the question of why did you pick this area? Do you have domain expertise? And how do you know people are actually going to need whatever this product or service is that you're making? So take call it another 15, 20 seconds for you to just put some thought into this, jot down some notes. I'll keep this slide up here for a few moments. All right. So moving on to our final core question here. What's new about what you're making? What substitutes do people resort to because it doesn't exist yet? So there's a couple of things that they're really trying to tease out. Oh, and I missed the, or they don't know about it. So there's a few things we've highlighted here that they're really trying to tease out. So first is the customer need. And here at Amazon, we're really obsessed with trying to figure out what our customer needs are. And the YC team is really trying to, again, deeply get into well do you know what that customer is looking for, what your ultimate customer is going to be doing. The second one is understanding substitutes. So really important to show or highlight how that customer's needs are not being met. Important to understand too that if the substitutes are fairly easy to get or inexpensive, it might mean that this is something you need to rethink about your business. But if the substitutes are incredibly difficult to find, not well known, really expensive, that really can end up building the case for why what it is that you're doing is valuable. And then the last piece is talking a little bit about the solution. So how you're going to solve for this problem after highlighting what it is that the customer actually needs, and then substitutes, whether they again have some sort of barrier or maybe they don't even exist yet, and using your overall solution to highlight those few things. So now we'll check out an example, and this is one that I personally really like, and our team champions around just its elegance and simplicity. So this is from Dropbox. So this is one of the first companies that went through Y Combinator back in 2007. So I'll pull this up here, and we'll give you just a second to read through. Maybe first we'll focus on that customer needs right at the top. All right. So I think this is really great because, again, it shows a very deep understanding of how it is that small teams work and the type of things that they're really trying to get from technology. So with Dropbox, of course, it's a file sharing service. For those of you who aren't familiar, it lets you collaborate and share different online digital documents. And in this first customer needs section, I just love how they highlight 1, 2, 3. So they really put a prioritization around what those few basic needs are, but they're very specific in being able to talk about what it is that the user or customer ends up actually needing. So we'll give a second here on the substitutes piece. So I'll give you just a moment to read through that. So again, I really like this because they do talk about that there are different components that you could configure potentially together or duct tape together in order to get what the small team's needs are or what their basic needs are, but that there is no strong integrated solution that gives them everything that they need. So they've mentioned that there are tools that do sync, there's tools that do backup of documents, and then there's tools that do web uploading, but there's nothing that really makes it easy to do all of those things in one place. And so that shows again that the product itself is really valuable, and again emphasizes their deep understanding of that. And then the last piece, I'll give you a few seconds here just to read through the solution. So I really like this because it talks about stripping out some of the complexity. It talks about a little bit of concepts that are unique to what Dropbox is trying to build. So they mentioned that things like versioning control, change logs, rsync, those are things that software developers use, but they're not done when you're talking about file management. And so it really, again, plays to their strength about what that solution looks like, and talks about how what they're building is unique. And then the last piece that they do, which I think is really customer obsessed, is They say it puts all of these fairly complex concepts into something that my little sister can figure out. So it says she uses Dropbox to keep track of her high school term papers, whereas back in 2007, she might have been burning CDs or carrying around USB sticks. Now she keeps everything organized and sent up to their file service. And so I think it does a great job of talking about the product, highlighting a little bit of the complexity behind the product and showing that it's fairly unique. But then it ends with saying it's not sophisticated, that his little sister who is in high school is able to effectively use these software development frameworks when it comes to collaborating around documents. And I think that's really impressive, just to show what that total opportunity is, to say a fairly unsophisticated user with technology, not a software developer, but somebody who's a high school student, is able to use this platform. And I think that really shows when you look at, wow, so if somebody who is a high school student can use it, then generally someone who is not a deep technologist would be able to get value out of the product too. So I think that this Dropbox example is kind of a gold standard when it comes to talking through the solution and what it is that they're building. And again, highlighting some of those substitutes, but showing what their strength is in the overall package. So that is it from me. I appreciate you all for sharing. I'll open it up to some Q&A here if anyone has any questions. And of course, you can either type it into the chat or jump on video. Mo, I don't know if you want to moderate or if you've seen anything come through.
Sure. Does anyone have any questions? It looks like David has a question in the chat. Are there any red flags in other areas, like why did you apply to YC?
Sure. I think it gets back to, they know that there's a lot of prestige in the program, and they try to suss out how motivated people are beyond just applying to Y Combinator. So I think that you want to tell a story that Y Combinator is something that is going to propel you into where you want to go for your business, but they don't look for somebody who's solely reliant on getting into Y Combinator in order to be successful. So I think that a fairly common red flag is just putting too much weight in the answer of, we really need to get into YC. But just talking about a few specific areas, I would say research some of the programs, some of the companies that have gone through the program before, talk about how they've been successful, look at some of the existing base of YC startups and talk about how they might be good customers of yours, thinking about what that network, the alumni base might be, and using that to your advantage and showing that you've done a little bit of the research to emphasize around how you would get the most out of that network, I think is probably a good way. But answering it to say, or teasing out that you're applying because you just want to get into YC with a startup is probably a red flag on that specific question.
Ellen asks, how many applications does Y Combinator get for a typical cohort?
Oof, I know it's definitely in the thousands. So they accept somewhere between 250 to 300, 325 companies for each cohort. And I think their acceptance rate is lower than 5%. So if you just do the math, you're looking at tens of thousands of applications that they're probably sifting through on an annual basis. So each cohort is fairly competitive.
Mark is asking, will the session, okay, yeah, and Emily answered that one. And Ebonique says she didn't want to apply this term because the only difference from her last application is that they launched the app last week. She says she thinks they should wait for revenue. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think that they're not necessarily focused on revenue, but if you again have a compelling narrative and show some data that aligns with the fact that you're building towards something that people really want, that can take the form of something that's not revenue. So I think it's a good idea to wait if you feel like you're not ready necessarily in a good position to get into the program. But I don't think it hurts to apply if you're not exactly at the stage in which you're bringing in revenue, but you do have compelling data in other ways around your business to show them that you're on the right track. I think that it's really hard if you don't really have a product in market, you don't have a lot of feedback from users, you maybe haven't done that much research to show what the total market size is for them to be able to bring a company in and think that they'd be able to really help that company get to the next level. So yeah, again, revenue probably not as important if you've got really strong data to demonstrate that you're on the right path.
If anyone else has questions, feel free to unmute. I actually have a question. I applied in the last batch, and I also applied for this batch coming up. And after you apply, you get an email, right? It says you can update them with any new traction almost. I was wondering what kind of traction does that usually indicate? Is it something like major, or can it be like something small, like being accepted to like a grant or like accelerator?
Yeah, I would say anything that probably impacts the total ownership of the company is something that will most likely be less compelling to them. If it's a grant or some sort of non-equity based accelerator program, probably a good award or something that you can highlight them with to show that you're getting some external validation. But if you go and you raise money, for example, from another company, or excuse me, from another investing group, or get into another incubator that makes an investment and takes equity, that does impact the terms in which they're investing in you, because Y Combinator has a very standard investment note. So I would say if it's showing that there's external validation and it's something that you're proud of as a founder, it doesn't hurt to let them know. And then if it is something around fundraising that changes the actual equity structure or ownership structure of the company, it more likely than not will probably hurt your chances of getting in than it might help. But if it's not impacting your cap table or your equity structure, then it's probably something that is a good piece of validation that wouldn't hurt letting them know.
Hey Doug, this is Troy. I help startups with traction and commercial milestones, and that's a question that comes up quite frequently. Is really defining traction when you're pre-revenue. And my question is can you speak to the variety of ways to define traction? So a letter of intent from a commercial partner, is that sufficient, short of actually having a contract? Or is customer discovery where you have spoken directly to your end user, the person who's going to be buying, and they have definitively said that yes, once this comes out, obviously it's not binding, but how anecdotal, I guess, is a short way to get to how anecdotal can the traction that you define be before people just say, okay, it's BS, I'm not going to accept it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that if your traction, I'll pop into some slides here, right? So if your traction progress to date is not you've signed up 5,000 new users, or you've gotten 200 customers, or you're making a $500,000 in annual revenue, if it's not that, but you have, for example, worked on this full time for 3 months, and you've been able to build a pipeline of 30 people, and you have 3 letters of intent, that is a pretty compelling story when you think about the compressed timeline and the initial signal. Now, I'm saying that from the perspective of traction, but also remember that traction is only relevant in the context of the total market size. So if you went out and you talked to all 100 of your possible customers and only 5 of them emailed you back, or only 2 of them are going to sign a letter of intent, then it's not that compelling of a business. So I think that the traction and the market opportunity go hand in hand, and it's on you as a founder to really tell that story, to say that, hey, we have been working on this for 6 months full time. We are going to market and we have uncovered this $1 billion opportunity. we haven't had that much time to speak to customers, but 95% of the 75 customers that we talk to are very interested in learning more about our solution and are willing to buy once we get something to market. Like, again, it's anecdotal, but you've got some data to back up the fact that there's a lot more people out there like that you could ultimately end up selling to. So it's really about how you spin it in the early days. And I think YC definitely knows that that will look different. I think there's also a hesitation on the YC side of, if a company's making $5 million in annual revenue and they want to become part of Y Combinator, the question is why? So, there's a level where there's too much traction. And on the other side, there might not be traction, but at least you're the right team and you're working on the right problem. It's a good question, though. Thank you. One last question here we've got from Evan. So, what's your advice for teams currently in the prototyping stage with active users to tell a compelling story about their solution, knowing that it may change significantly based on user feedback? Or is it too early for these teams to apply successfully? So I think that really kind of speaks to the previous question. If those users are representative of a really big base within $1 billion market opportunity, then I think that the team at YC and any real savvy investor will take that chance that the solution itself, the features, maybe pieces of the product will change. But ultimately, you're in the right market, you're going after a significant problem, and you've got a really compelling solution. So I think that, again, if you're in prototyping, you've got some active users, and those people are saying, I love this product. I signed up and I use it 4 times a day. It's something that I can't live without. If you can tease that out of your user interviews from some of those people involved in your prototype, that's really compelling. And I think in general, knowing when you're looking at an early stage company, people are going to expect that it will change. So yeah, I would say if you can get some anecdotes from those people, do they love it? Do they just like it? And if they just like it, then I think it's worth Evan maybe taking a step back and understanding, are we working on the right thing? How could we make this a little bit more compelling to make something that people truly couldn't live without as we're starting to flesh out this prototype? So hopefully that answers that question. But I think it's very similar to the last question. It's really about getting that strength in the problem and the solution, that significance, and then showing what some of the early insights are that you're building towards. Sure thing.
Doug, thank you so much for your time and for your advice.